Oh, hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World. I'm your host, Kane Sims, and shout out to Taris and our team for putting that little intro video together there. Super swanky stuff, like it. Welcome to VUX World. This episode of VUX World is presented by Intel. Now, the best thing that you can do for your business today is to get it prepared for the evolving challenges of tomorrow. People are going to be working more increased workloads on their computers, and all of the AI stuff that's coming down the pipeline, all the machine learning things that you run on your machines will all be run locally if you use Intel's Core Ultra processor. Essentially, it is an NPU, a neural processing unit, which offloads all of the AI workloads on your PC. So, for example, if you're using Zoom, like we are right now for this conversation with Martyn Redstone, then you'll notice that on Zoom you can do all kinds of things. You can do things like blur your background, change your background, do those kind of things. That uses machine learning because it understands where your body is, and when you move, the blur sticks around your body. That's machine learning, and it needs to process that somehow. And if you use Intel's new range of processors, the Intel Core Ultra, then that workload will be offloaded to this specific processor, freeing up capacity and speed and battery life for you to be able to work longer or more effectively on the things that you need to do. It's also powered by Intel V Pro, the platform that helps you secure and fully manage your whole laptop fleet remotely. And definitely, I believe that the power of AI is going to be immense. It's immense today. It's going to get even better tomorrow, and you need to prepare yourself for the future. And Intel's new line of AI PCs will help you do that. So, to find out more about the Intel Core Ultra processors, then you can visit vux.la/Intel. vux.la/Intel. Don't forget, you probably might be coming up with your kind of like renewal period now if you're working in IT, if you're an IT manager, if you manage a fleet of laptops. When you bought them all for COVID because everyone started to work remotely, if you are now coming up to a renewal of your fleet, definitely check out this because this will get you set up for tomorrow. So vux.la/Intel. Thank you very much, Intel, for sponsoring VUX World. All right, now then. Let's welcome today's guest, shall we? It is the well-known community leader and founder of BotJobs, a long-standing compatriot of the conversational AI community, Martyn Redstone. Martyn, welcome to VUX World, my friend.
Hey Kane, thanks for having me on. Finally, I'm long-time listener, first-time caller.
It's took a while, but finally we're here. Yeah, appreciate you joining me. We've worked together for a long time. You've been a very visible and keen supporter of Umpires, which we massively appreciate. You've helped us with recruitment for VUX World and stuff like that. So I'm hugely in debt to you, and really appreciate everything you've been doing for this industry and this community. And yeah, it's been a long time coming, but here we are. Thanks for joining us.
Here we are. Finally, yeah. We're all a bit older, a little bit wiser. But yeah, really good to be here. Cheers.
Don't know whether I'm that much wiser. Definitely older. There's definitely some grey hairs coming in now.
More of a wise guy than a wise man, I suppose.
But... Yeah, exactly. Anyway, no, yeah, it's really appreciated. I mean, on the podcast, we've covered recruitment and AI in recruitment before. We had Scotty Technologies on, which I know you're familiar with. That was a long while ago now. I can't remember exactly when it was, but something suggests it might have been as far back as 2020 or 2021, something like that. And obviously, a hell of a lot has changed since then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, Scotty is around. They're also kind of almost classed as a bit of a startup because I think at the time that you spoke to them, they were still very much focused on the contact center world, but they pivoted into the recruitment world. So really know Scotty well. They're doing well. They've got a great product that's offering out into the recruitment market.
Nice. And so tell those that are, I'm going to say, tell me a little bit about yourself. I feel as though I know more about you than I do my own wife at this point, but tell everybody else that may not be as familiar with Martyn Redstone a little bit more about what you do and about BotJobs and all that kind of stuff and how you got into all this space in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two sides to me, really. And not in a weird psychiatric way. But basically, I first got into the world of conversational AI just over 7 years ago now, actually, within the world of recruitment. So my kind of main day job is building conversational AI experiences for recruitment and HR. And I've been doing that for the last 7 years. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, obviously nobody was recruiting because everyone was being furloughed or being made redundant. And so nobody really wanted somebody like me to build recruitment tools because nobody was recruiting. So I thought, do you know what? Let's sack it. Let's go and find a job in conversational AI outside of recruitment. And asking around a few good people in the industry and saying, right, yeah, where do I go to find a job? And they said, there's nowhere to go. We can search through job boards and what have you, but there's nowhere specifically to go for conversational AI jobs. So I built it. Basically, I've been building recruitment systems for years. So I thought, well, if I can't do that, then what can I do? So I built a job board specifically for conversational AI. It's called BotJobs, bot-jobs.com. And so, yeah, that's been going for just about 4 years now. And it's a job board that covers all conversational AI roles globally. It gets busy sometimes it's not, but that's the state of the market, really.
What is that? Is there any trends behind that, like in terms of when it's busy and when it's not? Is it seasonal? Do companies hire seasonally, or is it up and down with the kind of hype of AI, if you want to call it that, like, or is it just random?
There's various trends. It can be quite random, but the trends that do come out of there, it's definitely seasonal. So hiring always takes a dip during the summer. So we tend to see a lot less activity going on over kind of July and August, and the same kind of towards the end of the year as well, December, January period as well. So it's quite seasonal. But obviously we then see that peak with the start of people's budgets. So kind of March, April time, we tend to see kind of a peak in hiring activity. But yeah, there was absolutely a trend that we saw as well. And actually, at Unpassed, you mentioned it earlier. I gave a talk on the state of the conversation design job market, and what we saw there was actually a downward trend in hiring that happened just after the launch of ChatGPT, because I think companies thought, we don't need designers anymore. We can do this ourselves. Oh, look, this thing's good at creating English language, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we absolutely saw a dip in hiring activity for conversation designers after ChatGPT. But then very quickly afterwards, within 6 months after that, we saw that correcting itself again. So there has been some interesting trends that we've seen, absolutely.
Do you think some of that might have been the kind of like, oh shit moment? Like, oh my God, ChatGPT's kind of arrived. What the hell do we do about this?
I think two things, definitely. I think, like I said, there was definitely a bit of we can do this ourselves now, because the technology's been commoditized, et cetera, et cetera. But then, yeah, I also think there was a bit of a freeze moment of, what does this mean? And we need to take a step back and work it all out before we actually work forward with a strategy. So yeah, so I think there was definitely a bit of there was a half of, we can do this ourselves now, it's all been commoditized, but actually there was a lot of companies that, and still now, as we see, a lot of companies that are still, we don't really know what to do with this technology.
Interesting. Here's BotJobs, for those who haven't yet been there. What I like about that is that you're straight in and there's no messing about, and you're straight in with the jobs on the homepage. There's none of this kind of like messing about. And look at that. If anyone's interested, let's zoom into this just a little bit. Product manager, ChatGPT, 310 to 465 grand a year. Have a bit of that.
So this is the problem. So let's talk about kind of trends that we've seen in the industry. With the launch of ChatGPT came this whole madness around prompt engineering, and the jury's still out around prompt engineering, prompt design, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But very, very quickly, I had people contacting me and saying, how do I get a job as a prompt engineer? I heard that you can get 350 grand a year, 600 grand a year as a prompt engineer. I can use ChatGPT. I'm a prompt engineer. And and that happened a lot in the first kind of 3 months of last year. It didn't help that certain companies were advertising prompt engineering roles at that kind of level, and it also didn't help that other recruitment agencies were telling people that that was the job of the future, and you can earn that kind of money. People unfortunately had a bit of a dose of reality after that, because prompt engineering isn't just, I can use ChatGPT to an intermediate level, and also it's only a few small companies that are paying that kind of money for those kind of roles that we just saw with OpenAI, and also with some other companies and people like Netflix and what have you.
Yeah. It's crazy that though. The fact that people think that I can use ChatGPT, therefore I'm a prompt engineer. Give me 350 grand a year, please. uh, that's mad.
There was a lot of hype, and this is the thing. This is what we all see. This has been, I think, one of the biggest challenges for us in our industry, in the conversational AI industry, is that everybody inside and outside of the industry has got super excited about it, and it was kind of our responsibility to temper that excitement a little bit, and to slow the hype down, and bring people back down and ground them in reality. And I know you've done a lot of work around that as well, but I think that's been a big responsibility for us in our industry.
Yeah, and that's partly. I think our responsibilities really is that you've got to bring people back down to earth. Yes, the technology is absolutely brilliant, and we all love it, and we're super excited by it. But at the same time, hype for hype's sake, for the sake of attention, and all that kind of stuff, it just gets nowhere. You've got to find the way as quickly as possible of figuring out what the reality is, and therefore everyone can move forward properly. But still, I'm still interested in looking at this the report, and maybe if it's available to download, we can stick it in the show notes.
Right on the homepage of BotJobs, there's a big black banner at the top that says "Download it here." So
there you go then. Let's do that. We'll link to that, of course. But what's interesting about it is that the salary expectations are here. This is conversation design, though. This isn't like prompt engineering and stuff like that. This is purely conversation design.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this is a few thousand roles that have been advertised on BotJobs in the last 3.5 years. So unfortunately, salary data is really hard to come by, because in a lot of places around the world, it's not a legal requirement to put the salary on the job. Only in kind of parts of America.
And everyone's evasive and doesn't want to, trying to get something for nothing, so they don't want to tell you how much money they've got.
Well, exactly. And so in parts of America, it's now a legal requirement to put the salary range on the job. So we can start gathering data from that and start making some decent assumptions as well. But yeah, based on that kind of data that we've had over the last 3.5 years, we've got average salaries now, kind of top end and bottom end, and the average salaries for conversation designers in the US. And we can also then infer the UK, because there is a pretty solid calculation in the background on how to calculate UK as well. So and not too shabby, I have to say. I think ultimately for and we talk about this later on in the report, whether it's a design job or whether it's a technical job, but for the kind of role that you're moving into as a conversation designer, it's a pretty well paid job compared to the average. Yeah,
definitely. It's double the UK average, basically.
Yeah.
And also, what's interesting, I'll scroll a little bit further down here, is that the companies hiring. Obviously, you'd expect Google to be up there, because basically they're that's what they do. Deloitte heavily. Amazon, obviously, you'd expect that as well. But Wells Fargo in the top 4 companies that are advertising for these roles is surprising to me, because they've had teams of people for a long time doing this stuff.
Yeah. Now there's a caveat with this data, that this is based on the number of job adverts, and companies like Wells Fargo will continuously advertise.
Right.
Because especially, and this is the interesting thing about our world right now, is that in terms of just in general the world of employment, is obviously with this push back to the return to the office, people are now struggling to hire. And so with companies like Wells Fargo and actually some of the other companies in that top 10, they're now advertising for for people in random parts of the country where people may not be anymore. And so they're just re-advertising until they find somebody. So there is a bit of a caveat there, that it is the number of adverts rather than the number of actual requirements. But at the same time, they're a continuously advertising company, which means that they're continuously looking for talent.
That makes sense. And also another interesting thing I'm picking up here is the distribution of roles in terms of what countries are advertising for the most conversation designers. Now, again, this is predominantly. Having said that, a lot of the roles that are on BotJobs, they're not specifically conversation design. No. There's product designers. There's other roles that I've seen that are not specific to conversation design. However, it's a large focus on conversational AI, isn't it?
Yeah.
So go on.
So sorry, yeah. So BotJobs is every role to do with conversational AI. And that's obviously broken down into different things. So our top kind of category is engineering, actually.
Right.
So the number one kind of top number of jobs is engineering, but yeah, conversation design is pretty much up there as well. So this report is based on extracting only the conversation design jobs.
Ah, right, I'm with you. Fair enough. And so this then is interesting because it seems as though the USA are just so far ahead and above of every other country in terms of either their recognition of the importance of conversation designers, or maybe it's a miles bigger country and therefore there's more jobs available, etc., etc., etc. I don't know what you read into that.
It's the centricity of tech companies more than anything else. So if you think about the previous thing that you showed around the top companies, so kind of Google, Meta, Amazon, most of their hiring is going to be in the US for conversation designers. And so that's what we're seeing there is a not only a company that's probably more a country that's more advanced in their adoption of conversational AI, but also just a centricity of tech companies and tech hubs within global companies as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you think about the role conversation design and the term conversation design? Because obviously it's been through a lot of different manifestations over the years. It's kind of like, and even still today, I suppose you've got like IVR designers and VUI designers and chatbot designers, and some people might even be called a chatbot developer, but really what they're doing 99% of it is actually design work, and kind of like
Yeah.
there's this big sort of like, I suppose, lack of standardization around what that sort of role is. Like, what's your assessment of how companies are thinking about the type of roles that are required for AI programs? And is there a recognition broadly that one, design is an important factor, and two, conversation design is typically the thing that they call it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in terms of companies, and I'm actually doing some work with Dashbot actually at the minute around kind of maturity of companies, conversational AI strategy compared to kind of the staffing that they need.
Mm.
And what's quite interesting is that we tend to see right at the beginning of a company, kind of we're talking about an enterprise, a corporate company. So it could be a retailer or a healthcare company or something. So when they're kind of first going for it from a conversational AI strategy, they kind of need an odd job person, a kind of jack of all trades.
Yeah.
But then kind of, once that strategy starts maturing and they've got their kind of V1 of their chatbot or their voice bot or what have you, that's when they start thinking about bringing designers in. And they do call them lots of different things. We've got UX content design writers, we've got, conversation designers, like you said, VUI designers, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no kind of real standardization around what to call them or what they even do in their job, which was the whole point of this report, really. But we do know that they're required. And I was having this back and forth with Braden from VoiceFlow a while ago. Do we start trying to change the name of this to something like AI interaction designer or something like that, where it's a little bit more obvious what we're trying to do? Because conversation design makes sense for the people that do it. But when I'm, at a dinner party and I tell people that I'm a conversation designer, is anyone going to really understand what I do?
Yeah.
So very, very interesting. Great question. We do see people knowing that they need to bring in some kind of designer, but it tends to be a little bit further down in their strategy.
Yeah. That's a good one. That if you tell a friend that I'm a conversation designer, it's like, well, what are you going to do then? Design this conversation? Like, what?
Hang on, let's just all stop while I work this one out.
Yeah, yeah. Are you some sort of like psychologist? What are you going to do? Do I even trust you to have this conversation now that you can design them? But I think for us, I mean, my background is in lots of things, but I spent a lot of time working in government on digital transformation initiatives, and I was a service designer essentially, and worked with lots of service designers, business analysts, developers and things like that. And I think service design for me is the closest that you get when you're saying that someone needs to be a jack of all trades. Every company I've worked with that has conversation designers, or every agency or consultancy or anything like that, anyone who's had a conversation designer, they end up being a jack of all trades anyway. Because if you look at certain companies of a certain scale, they may have conversation designers that are called conversation designers, but actually what they are essentially is copywriters,
Yeah.
and they kind of just write the dialogue that the thing says in response. And
Yes.
and I've been in situations before where design happens in terms of like what the conversation should be and how we're going to get someone from beginning to end and what are the needs of the users that we need to satisfy and all that kind of stuff. All of that happens over here, and then placeholder dialogues put in place before it's
Yeah.
given to another designer who then writes the copy. And it's like that's never really worked because the copywriter doesn't have a clue about the actual conversation and the context of all the dialogue that they're writing. It's just a spreadsheet full of words. So it's like
Yeah.
you have to be able to marry the two sides together. And so for me, it's always been a jack of all trades type of role. You need someone who can work with users to understand user needs and do things like user research. And yes, you could bring a user researcher in for that, but translating user research into proper empathy is quite hard to achieve unless you're in the room with the user type of thing. And then you need to do some sort of requirements gathering, which means you need to start working with the business to understand what their goals are and what the requirements are and what the scope is and all. And again, this could be a different role, but I always thought that in the roles that I've had as a conversation designer, I've done the whole thing. And that's
Yeah.
because of the service designer background. And it's like, well, we need to understand the reason that we're doing this. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And then we can get on with the design. And then on the design side, it's like, yes, you're designing the NLU, you're designing the flows, you're designing the dialogue, you're designing the technical specifications that need to happen to bring this thing to life. You're doing the QA because you're the one that's designed it, so you know what the experience needs to be. So you need to
Yes.
do the QA, and it's and then you need to understand. Well, we're not doing this for the sake of it. There needs to be an outcome. So how are we going to measure that outcome, and how are we going to measure the things that we're doing to make sure that we're progressing people towards that outcome? So then you've got this business analyst sort of lens as well. So for going all the way back to the conversation you were saying earlier that you had with Braden around what this role should be called, we essentially at VUX we call it AI service design. And that's essentially what I see it as being, because anytime you interact with a chatbot or a voice assistant or anything like that, I view it akin to opening Netflix and trying to decide what to watch, or opening Spotify and trying to play a song. There's a digital interaction that's happening and you're accessing some kind of service. And I don't mean service as in, a utility company that provides services. You could be a retailer that sells products, but your chatbot is a service. And so you're designing a service. So I think it's more like service design. And so we don't have any roles necessarily that are called AI service design. I think we still call them conversation designers, but I think our methodology and the way we talk about it is AI service design.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, what you're saying is really interesting because first of all, it takes me back to the beginning of my career in conversational AI, and it was totally exactly that, doing absolutely everything. But I think that there was this interesting. I'd like to be able to kind of put a pin in it and work out exactly when, but but everything you talk about, and we talk about this a little bit more in the report, is conversation design a technical role or a design role? And I think it's everything. I've always said I think it's a bit of everything. But I think there was a point in recent history where a lot of people in the community have said, no, it's definitely a design role. It's definitely not a technical role. And I always kind of argue a little bit about that because number one, the data in terms of what people are wanting, what employers are actually wanting is it's definitely got some technical stuff to it. But I tend to agree with you, and so that's what I've seen is that when companies are first kind of dipping their toes into this world, they absolutely want a jack of all trades, but that jack of all trades needs to be design focused, absolutely, because everything that you do is going to be servicing a user. And I kin it back to when websites first came around, and it was kind of, Dave in IT had the project of building a website, and it was just a horrific experience. It had hyperlinks everywhere, but it was it was a terrible experience. There was no user journeys, there was no, thought process around branding, there was no X, Y, and Z. And that's kind of where things happen, I think, from a conversational AI perspective, is that if companies do it in the wrong way, they'll give it to Dave in IT to create a chatbot, and it's a terrible experience. Whereas if you bring in somebody who's very design focused but a jack of all trades, you get a much better experience and a much better outcome.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. The area where it's an interesting one about how technical is it, because I remember I put a poll out. It was last year on LinkedIn, and I asked a few people, in the network and stuff like that, about what they think about this, because we were having some internal debates about who should actually be doing the specific dialogue management piece. So anyone can design a hypothetical conversation, an outline, a flow, if you like, for want of a better phrase. But essentially, here's the pieces of the conversations that we need to have in order to deliver against this process.
Yep.
And that's easy enough to describe. It's easy enough to prototype, to be able to validate that actually is this phasing and are these sequences and is this idea a good idea. But then sooner or later it needs to be put into some sort of system. And when it comes to putting it in the system, doesn't matter what system you're using and what platform you're using, whose job is that bit? Because that's when it starts to get a bit more technical, because you might need to know Google Dialogflow or IBM Watson or another platform. I know there's some data in here on the top platforms that need experience with, and we'll come to that in a sec. But then, and getting something into there is fine. You know, I know conversation designers who can get something into Google Dialogflow and it's fine. However, to make the experience that you want, maybe you need to start working with APIs. Maybe you need to start doing some more enhanced variable kind of capture and stuff like that. Maybe you need to do a little bit of post-processing on the utterance to clean it up and strip out the data that you need or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden, it's like you do need to be some technical skills. And so, and there was no agreement amongst the conversation designers that we all know on whose role it is to get this stuff into a platform. Half of them were like, no, all we do is we define spec and we scope it out and we write dialogue, but then someone else builds the NLU and does the flows and configures a system. Others were like, well, it needs to be someone who configures a system. And then you come up with this notion of what a full stack conversation designer is. Because I was talking to some developers and they were like, well, we do everything in IBM Watson, and IBM Watson's our environment. But they still think of themselves as doing conversation design.
Yeah.
So even though they're technical, they still believe that they're design, and they are. You know, there's no kind of right or wrong. So it's kind of like it's a really interesting area where different companies do it different ways, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of standardization on who does what.
No, exactly. There isn't any standardization. There's no standardization around expectations as well. So you know, that poll's really interesting, and the conversations you had around that, because it shows that there's a clear kind of divide within the industry as well in terms of conversation designers, whether they're expected to do that or not. I will say that from the data we have in BotJobs, there is an expectation that conversation designers also do that piece as well. But there's a lot of pushback from people who aren't comfortable from a you know, technical perspective to do that. So and it's interesting you mentioned APIs, because that's been a clear trend that I've seen over the last few years, has been an increase in job adverts saying that you need to be comfortable using APIs as well. That's clear from like you said, you know, bringing data in from different systems and creating a much better experience, etc. But yeah, that if I'd have done that same chart years ago, that'd have been, you know, right down there, API. Yeah. It's definitely coming about more and more and more. But yeah, I agree with you. I think there's no clear agreement. If it was up to me, I'd be in the camp of, yes, absolutely, you need to be doing the dialogue management as well. You need to be working in those systems. I feel as though it's just part and parcel of designing a good experience ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very difficult for a design. I mean, there was actually a really great conversation. I think it might have been last week or early this week. I don't know if you caught it. Emily Bansaf kind of held a bit of a roundtable, and I caught the first kind of 15, 20 minutes or so of it. And there was a bit of a discussion about that, which is kind of like, where does the role of a conversation designer begin and end? And some of the discussion was around, like, you know, copywriting and this, that, and the other. And I thought to myself, if I was hiring for a conversation designer and their lead skill set was copywriting, I'd have a bit of an issue with that, because I wouldn't have enough work for them. You know, it's like you need to be able to do a lot more than that. And I think that's probably 10 to 20% of what's required, especially even less so with large language models. Not that they can write well, because I don't think they can whatsoever, but it's more about shaping the prompt and crafting the right placeholders for it to then fill in content around. And so, yeah, I agree. I think that a conversation designer today needs to be multidisciplinary in their own skill set, rather than being in part of a multidisciplinary team where one person does the copywriting, one person does the NLU, one person does dialogue design, one person does technical bits. I think there's argument there that there could be a division between technical and design. I still think that's the case. You know, in our team, for example, we've got people who focus more on experience design, but they still work within the platforms, and
Yes.
then people who just do the technical bits and make sure it's all secure and it's hanging together properly and it's all working as it should do type of thing,
Yeah.
and integrations and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think conversation designers today need to have a lot more skills than perhaps 3 years ago.
I think I agree, and I definitely see kind of that, conversational AI engineer role coming about more and more, which is like you said, that clear kind of divide in your team as well. But I do think that when I see kind of new conversation designers coming into the industry, it's because they've done some kind of conversion course, which has been marketed out to copywriters, and I think that's quite interesting. And I think it's not setting them up for success very well.
I think there's definitely scope for taking people who understand language and understand, linguists make some of the best conversation designers without a shadow of a doubt. There's absolutely, I don't think there's any argument about that. It's a question of what else, what
Yes.
else. Like Micah Chroneweker is a perfect example. She's a linguist. She really knows her stuff around language, but she's
Yeah.
also actually pretty technical. She can explain in
Yes.
detail what prompt engineering is. She can explain
Yeah.
in detail how a large language model works. She can explain in detail how you can leverage them and use them. And so it's kind of like you need the understanding and foundational grasp of language. Absolutely. That will put you head and shoulders above someone that doesn't. But you also need to add the other strings to your bow to make sure that you're able to properly leverage the technology and understand
Exactly.
it and all that lot,
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Let's talk about the platform experience then, because this is interesting. The I remember before, I think it was 20. When was this? 2022 perhaps, and Qbox published a study, and it was looking at of the clients that use Qbox, which not necessarily is representative of everybody in the world, but they had a sufficient number of clients.
Yeah.
Of the clients that use Qbox, what platforms do they use? And it was pretty much split down the middle of Google Dialogflow and IBM Watson, and then Cognigy was just creeping in a little bit into the pie chart, and then everything else was like 1% or something like that.
Yeah.
But you'll find your data looks different to that, because there's a lot more platforms in here that is great, because all of the platforms on this list are companies who have really been banging the drum. They've really been pushing it. They've been at it for a long time, and lots of them have very capable platforms. So it's nice to see this reflected in the job requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is absolutely representative of the fact that there are just a lot more conversational AI platforms and tools in the market nowadays that are selling to enterprise businesses. Like you said, 5 years ago or 4 or 5 years ago, there weren't really many that were, really kind of hitting enterprise level companies. But I think now there is so many options out there that you can now see businesses who are adopting lots of different companies who are then driving that forward in their AI strategy. You do see kind of, some trends like you see Ada there at the kind of bottom of the large numbers, and you see that from a retail perspective or from a e-commerce perspective, where somebody might be looking for a conversation designer in that piece. But definitely, it's good to see platforms like Cognigy still on there, Core as well. We've seen downward trends in some. We've seen trends of growth in others, and I think that's really interesting as well. So you can see VoiceFlow, I think number 7 in there, if my counting's doing well today. And that's interesting because a few years ago they weren't on there at all, and they were only referred to here and there. Whereas now, a lot of the time they're referred to from kind of prototyping and design tool. So a job advert will say need to have experience of prototyping and design on VoiceFlow, but more and more we're starting to see people talking about VoiceFlow from a production conversational AI perspective. Also, Rasa has seen a big growth in Rasa as well over the last few years. But again, seeing kind of downward trends on platforms like LivePerson and Yellow as well. Seen a bit of a downturn in that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, definitely VoiceFlow, we can say that they've been doing a great job of kind of repositioning themselves from being a design focused platform to being a production platform. They've invested heavily in LLM workflows and generative AI, and I think they're doing a really good job, certainly of tapping into that sort of like not hobbyist, but like the startup AI agency kind of trend that's happening now,
Yes.
where one man and two man bands are building solutions for the small businesses and stuff like that, and VoiceFlow seem to be like Bland AI and VoiceFlow. They're part of that group basically. So it's brilliant to be able to see them sort of find what seemingly is their product market fit, really, because the prototyping stuff is 100% valuable and 100% required, and I can totally see why a business would buy VoiceFlow purely for that. But there's always a gap between that prototype and the production system you're using. And I think that's always been the Achilles heel of VoiceFlow, is bridging that gap. But I think they found a real sweet spot there with the whole sort of like generative AI pipeline. I'm not surprised to see live person be. I'm surprised to see live person be as high as it is, actually.
Well, remember that's over the last 4 years. So if that had been a snapshot, 3 years ago, then they'd have been top three. But
Right.
they were heavily kind of advertised a few years ago, but now not really.
That's interesting. I mean, Celine and the team are doing a great job in terms of what they're doing and their design practice and stuff like that. The challenges for live person is that team of great people are just one small team in a large organization, and live person generally, from what I can gather from those that I know have had experience using it, has probably not kept pace with the likes of VoiceFlow in terms of product development. So I don't know how that's going to end up. However, I think a company that I would probably pick out of this. I mean, we know about the Cause and the Cognigies, and Amelia obviously now is being acquired by SoundHound, but one of the ones to watch on this for those tuning in is Sprinkler here. Now, Sprinkler, I think they're celebrating their 15th anniversary this week. They started as a social media platform. They developed what's interesting about Sprinkler compared to other platforms is that they focused initially on conversational intelligence. So they essentially hoovered up all the social media interactions that their clients were utilizing it for. Think of it, I suppose, a bit like a Hootsuite type of tool. And we're able to then build this conversational intelligence platform that analyzed all of that data. So right from the very beginning, they've been investing in NLP and conversational intelligence, and then they started adding other channels into it. And over time, they added a contact center to it. So now you've got all your conversations from all your channels in one place. And then all of a sudden, there's a call center element, and now you can take voice calls in there, all the while refining this conversational intelligence piece. And then they had a bot builder platform, and now they're adding generative AI. And so they're a dark horse, I think, because they've got essentially a CPaaS, which is all your channel connectivities. They've got deep conversational intelligence. They've got end-to-end technology, because you can manage all of your channels plus your call center in there. And they've got an AI automation platform within it. And so Core AI and Zoom, for example, Zoom probably might be in here in a few years if they keep going the way they're going. But those companies are starting to invest in the call center piece. And same thing as Quick, actually. Quick's starting to invest in the call center piece. And so I mentioned this a long time ago, but you can start to see it happening now, which is that the conversational AI platforms are coming up market. So they're kind of moving up the stack to bring in the conversation, the contact channel piece. And the contact center providers are going down the stack to bring in the AI piece. So the Genesis of the world and all that kind of stuff. They're trying to build the bot platforms. But the bot platforms are building the contact centers. And so the unique part about that is that these platforms are genuinely AI first. Core, Zoom, Sprinkler, they are AI first companies that are just adding the contact center piece, because if you can build your AI automation and your intelligence, your contact center is just another channel. And so I think we'll see big growth for those companies: Sprinkler, Core, Zoom, probably Quick if they can integrate it all and make it holistic. Then that's the future. AI native companies that build on channel connectivity and voice capabilities, I think, will give the big dogs a run for the money.
I agree. I think from back 2-3 years ago to call and contact center exhibition in Excel in London, there was certainly kind of those contact center, the CPaaS companies who were adding in a bot builder, adding in a chatbot, adding in a this. And so that was kind of exactly like you said, saw that trend happening a couple of years ago. And I think this year in November, it's going to be really interesting to see how many AI native companies are there advertising their contact center solution now. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that trend. But I agree. I think there's a really interesting reshaping of the vendor market in the contact center world happening right now.
Definitely. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier on, which is separating the hype from the reality.
Yeah.
Because we were at the Call and Contact Center Expo last year, and one of the things I took away from that was every single sign on every single stand said AI. And it was like, it's like everything's an AI platform. And I remember, I won't name names, but I went round every single vendor in that room and I was asking, what are your AI capabilities specifically? And one of them showed me a search tool, right? Apart from saying that they integrate with Amazon Bedrock, they showed me a search tool and they said, oh, it's brilliant. All you got to do, look, is you just, name what you want to search for and you can search for it and it'll find it. And he typed in the word bin. He typed in the word bin and then got a series of articles presented back to him. And said, there you go, look. I was like, that's just keyword search. There's no AI about that. That's the least sophisticated use of this technology that you could possibly have.
Yeah.
But yet there's a big massive science in AI first. Now that might have been the sales team not really understanding, what these things, what the technology is and the capabilities that they have. But I just found it last year to be a big hype session where everyone's talking about AI, and some of the vendors that were talking about AI actually have other platforms under the hood. Like Amelia, now that it's been acquired by SoundHound now, but Amelia were powering 2 of the contact centers that were there. Yet those contact centers themselves are saying AI native, build bots and all that kind of stuff. And it was a weird sort of environment. So I'll be there. Are you going this year?
Yeah, I'll be going. I'm registered, so looking forward to it. But yeah, it's the same in my world, in the world of recruitment. That every platform was rushing to become kind of AI native, even though they might not have been for the last 20 years, and it was almost a rush to kind of use the word copilot in my world. Everybody was launching a recruiter's copilot, and it just wasn't. It was all the same. It was all just APIs into OpenAI. Can I build a job description out of this, that, and the other? And it's nothing that impressive. But I think there's some new companies that are around that are really kind of AI native. And you say that about kind of Amelia powering some of the contact center stuff there, but it's exactly the same in the recruitment industry where people who are talking about building a conversational platform, their own proprietary stuff, turns out they're powered by Core. So it's that kind of stuff. It happens everywhere. But this is the important thing about people like you and I who are consultants to people, is that we're able to help our clients navigate that snake oil. And I think that's certainly, I talked about kind of leveling that hype earlier, but that again is a really key part of what we need to help people with, is because with every hype like this, there is just so much snake oil out there. So helping people navigate that's certainly really important.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. The you mentioned there that some of those use cases are not very impressive. Like, yeah, anyone can grab an OpenAI API and ask it to create a job description. But what are some of the use cases that are pretty exciting that you've come across in the recruitment space? Is there anything that any companies or any use cases that you come across that you think, actually that is actually pretty on the money?
There's lots of stuff going on. I always put it back to what's going to improve the job seeker's experience, what's going to improve the candidate experience. The biggest challenge and the biggest annoyance from a candidate's perspective is applying and not hearing anything. So I think that any tool that's coming out that's helping with that and doing it well and doing it in an integrated fashion with the other piece of the tech stack is going to do well. I'm actually tomorrow hosting the innovation stage at in-house recruitment conference, so I'm looking forward to seeing what's coming out on the kind of new startup world. But I've seen lots of really cool things. I think voice is going to be the interesting next thing in recruitment. Whilst there's a lot of recruiters that are pushing back and saying, people don't want to talk to, voice bots. Actually, what we're seeing is they are, because they're not able to talk to anyone else. They might as well talk to a voice bot. And there are some really, really cool use cases out there for voice. Not only the simple, let's do an interview with you, but also things like, let's check in on you, lone worker safety. Let's help you prepare for an interview. Let's do some interview practice with you. So there's some really, really interesting use cases using technology like voice AI. But it's about the use case more than the actual technology from my perspective.
That's interesting. That's a great use case, that simulated job interviews, because there was a post I saw on LinkedIn. Who was it? Is it Thomas Laird? I think it might be. Forgive me if it's not, but it might be. With this product that they're creating, which is intended for call center agents to essentially practice calls with customers.
Yep.
So they will take like previous calls, take the transcript from the customer, feed that into an LLM or some sort of framework that will say, this is the role you're playing, this is the kind of stuff that you need to say in the call, and they'll essentially play that call back so that the AI will be acting as though it was that caller, and then the agent will have to then deal with that call basically, and then presumably there's some scoring that happens or some appraisal that happens after that. So it sounds like a very similar thing, like let's practice for this job interview, give it the job description, give it the kind of criteria, and then it can grade the responses and offer feedback and stuff like that.
Exactly.
That's a brilliant use case. Yeah. So any other interesting use cases? I mean, definitely not hearing back from someone is a big issue. I know that for the companies that are recruiting, I can imagine that actually being a pain point for them as well, because if you're OpenAI and you're advertising this product management role at 350 grand, you're going to be overwhelmed.
Yeah. It's a capacity issue more than anything else. So when people talk about kind of poor recruitment experiences, it's not because you're dealing with a really bad recruiter, it's because you're dealing with an overwhelmed recruiter. So I think that's something to bear in mind. Other use cases for good AI tooling, there's a great platform out there called Poetry, which is kind of taking everything that a recruiter has to do from a content creation perspective and just making it easier for them. So let's just say you're hiring for a Java developer in London. You put that into the platform and it would create absolutely everything for you, not just a job advert, but social images, interview questions, hiring manager briefing documents, potentially kind of objection handling, when you're reaching out to candidates to say come and work for us, lots and lots of different things. So actually doing that in 3 minutes compared to the 36 hours a week that somebody might take on doing those kind of things. So I think that's a really, really good. It's not just the plug into OpenAI and create a job description. It's thinking about holistically, what does a recruiter have to create collateral in the collateral sense for a job every single time, repeating it over and over and over. So I think that's really impressive. But actually, one of the most one of the most interesting things is actually regulation and compliance right now. I know that sounds really boring, but it's something we all have to deal with. And there's so we talked about the voice stuff, which is really cool, and there's some really great businesses out there like Talk Push and Sam doing some really good things. And there's Poetry doing the kind of the collateral enablement. But actually, there's an issue now with regulation because in the EU AI Act, employment is a high risk area. So not only do technology vendors need to be compliant, but recruitment teams also need to be compliant as well and make sure that the AI systems that their candidates are engaging with from a European perspective are compliant. So there's a great tool out there called Warden.ai that's helping people do that, automated auditing of recruitment systems and HR systems against regulations such as EU AI Act, GDPR, New York regulation, et cetera, et cetera.
That's interesting. Where does it stand in terms of, because you can see, one, you can see opportunity, but two, you can see potential issues, which is like, let's say that you have a use case of initially, first of all, screening applications to pick out the applications or the CVs that more closely represent the job description and therefore surfacing those as priorities, and potentially then discarding the rest of them and automatically getting in touch with everybody else and say, hey, sorry, you haven't made the cut type of thing. Yeah. That's the kind of area where sounds like a perfect use case. But the reality is that there is AIs making decisions around people's jobs. And then at the same time, you could have potentially some screening questions in there, which is, a phone call that happens and there's an interview that happens over the phone and the AI determines that actually you haven't quite made the cut. And therefore they're making another decision. So it's potentially making hiring decisions-ish for you. And I suppose that's probably an ethical area that I imagine some people are looking at.
It really is. And that's what everybody's trying to drive towards is how can you automate the entire recruitment process? But ultimately, it comes down to an explainability perspective. And as does everything. If you're comfortable with the transparency of your models, of your algorithms, and you can explain them, then there shouldn't be much of a risk. The challenge is that you can't. And there's this whole kind of piece around automated decision making versus automated decision execution that I work with people on. And so if a recruiter or a recruitment team or an HR team are making the decision and AI is just kind of repeating that, then that's absolutely fine because it's a human-based decision that AI is just running over and over and over. But when we start getting to the kind of the decision-making algorithmic machine learning level, yeah, both ethically and legally, you've got some issues.
Yeah, definitely. Wicked. Well, Martyn, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Sorry it took us so long to do this, but it's been well worth it. Absolutely fantastic conversation. We will put the links to BotJobs, bot-jobs, for those that want to check out whether there's any jobs for you there. We'll put your contact details in there as well, Martyn, for LinkedIn, if you're happy with that, if people can reach out to you and get in touch if they need something from you. And yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Good stuff. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Kane.
Nice one. Thank you all for tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye now.